For the better part of the last decade or so, every single time when it gets to November and December, I usually look at my books, see how much profit I've made, and then figure out, should I buy gear to offset that profit? Basically, let's say I bought a camera for 10 grand and I had a $10,000 profit that year. I could write off that camera that same year, and then it would basically offset my profit and I wouldn't owe any taxes. And the way I kept kind of convincing myself that this was a good idea was, let's say a camera is $10,000 and let's say my taxes were going to be 30% between state and federal. Well, then I'm thinking, I'm getting that camera for $7,000. I get that deduction against that $10,000 profit, and basically I save that 30%. Well, that was a good idea for a while, and I wanted to make this video because every single person I've talked to that is anywhere in the world of filmmaking, it could be even photographers and audio guys, they've done this every single year for as long as they've been in this career. And I'm talking about guys in their 60s that are still getting their parents or their mom to co-sign on a loan for, or like a mortgage, because they've done this so often every single year that on paper they basically never make money. Now the problem with this is, if there is no end to it, what's the point? The point of buying gear usually is so you could get better, bigger jobs and have a better, bigger profit margin as you go. But if every year you have to keep doing that to keep up with the latest gear, there is really no point to it. If you get to your 60, you get to close to retirement and you're still showing $15,000 in profit because you took everything else and bought more gear, where does it end? I think you have to think of this as two different ways, and I'll show you in a second. I'll explain a better way, I think, that you can spend money at the end of the year and still take some advantages with taxes. But basically, when I was freelancing, I think it was a really good move for maybe 4 or 5 years to keep reinvesting the profits into gear, because as a freelancer, it gives you more opportunities. Because let's say your day rate's $600, but if you get $600 worth of gear rental on that job, now you're making $1,200 a day. If you're buying the right piece of gear, it could really be beneficial in the freelance world. But when I made the transition to the video production world, it no longer made sense, especially when I started hiring other people that had their own gear. Now, for example, I never hire a sound guy and give them my sound gear. They don't need it, right? A lot of times when I hire a DP, they want to use their own package, their own camera. On higher end jobs where we're using Reds and Alexas, again, those are things that you rent out. It never made sense to buy those for the volume of jobs we were doing with those. So at some level, when I made that transitions, I basically decided not just buy gear at the end of the year, but I bought gear throughout the year as I needed to buy gear. So I only bought gear when we had a booked job coming up, and I thought, oh, now I could get this gear on this job, and because of how many days that job is, it could pay off 20-25% of that piece of gear. So sort of the same tax benefit, but with an actual job, right? I still get the tax write-off, but I don't have to wait every time I freak out in December that I have to spend a certain amount of money. Because when you do that, what ends up happening is you just buy stuff you don't need. Most of the times people, when they wait till the end of the year and they look at their profit and they're trying to figure out how to offset that to basically pay less taxes, they just buy whatever that comes around. I've done it many, many times. And at one point I looked around and I had 8 cameras when I was freelancing. And in some cases I had a 2-3 camera shoot, but I was never using 8 cameras. And there were different cameras, Canon, Sony's, Blackmagic, and it just was not a good move. So my whole point with this is a better way that I think you could spend money at the end of the year if buying gear has run its course and you have enough to basically handle every job. So if you're a freelancer and you're building up your gear inventory to make more money, it's okay to spend a few years building that up. If you are trying to run a video production company so your time is not really tied directly to how much money you're making, one of the ways, and I should say, I do talk to my accountant every December, usually around November, December, and then we go through my books. I use QuickBooks. We go through the profit and loss statement. We see where it makes sense to reinvest into the business, and I have that conversation with him. So I'm just telling you, not as any type of financial advice or tax advice, but what I talk to my accountant about usually goes along something like this. But what I've decided to do in the last 3-4 years, I would say I've barely bought any gear, because the gear I had could handle the jobs, and where I can't handle the job, I usually rent. And by the time I get to a point where I feel like now I'm renting too much, I will buy that piece of gear. But what I spend money on now is I prepay some things in advance. For example, my Adobe Creative Cloud membership for our team, the multiple Creative Cloud membership we pay those ahead of time. You could pay those like a year ahead. So usually in December, you could pay it for the whole year and not have a monthly subscription fee. So we do that with a lot of our subscriptions if we need to. You could prepay rent if you're renting an office. I prepaid our rent for the next year. You could also prepay advertising dollars. So a lot of times I will put money into my Google ad account. So when I'm running Google and YouTube ads, it's already paid for ahead of time. Now, this is some things, again, you should talk to your accountant for, but if you are able to prepay things like that, you're basically reinvesting into a real business rather than just gear. Because the gear end, I'm telling you, I've been in this industry for 15 years, and all the guys I've seen that have been doing this for 30, 40 years have not won this battle. It's a never-ending battle. Even with sound guys that I thought, oh, sound gear doesn't involve all that much, so they'll get to a point where they have enough. No, it's not the case. There's kind of an unlimited amount of gear you could own, and if you just keep playing that game, I don't think you'll ever win that game, and you'll just get to your 60s and you'll just have a ton of gear that's probably worth far less than what you pay for. Gear depreciates very rapidly, especially cameras, so the resale value is going to be close to nothing. I just showed a Canon C300 that I had bought for $12,000 for $1,500, right? So they don't keep that value for a long time. I mean, I've had this and it's paid for itself many times over, but you get the idea. You're not going to have the same value you put in it, or even half that, in a few years down the road. And another thing I like to prepay for is sometimes I like to prepay for labor if I can, like prepay for a job, things like that. So think of that. Talk to a CPA though, and if you don't have one, hire a CPA, because they could save you a ton of money. They've saved me so much money with this kind of tips on what I could do to write off and invest into my business. I've even done this with production vehicles. I was able to buy a production vehicle, write it off all in the same year, in a year where I was very profitable. But I still pay a ton in taxes, because at some point I realized I don't have to just keep reinvesting in my business when I get to the point where I feel like it's growing as it needs to. So, in the last 3 or 4 years, I've taken a significant amount of profit, which then required me to pay a significant amount of tax, right? But I still play this game, but it's not all about gear anymore. I reinvest in a ton of other stuff for my business at the end of each year. So I hope you found this video useful. Again, talk to your CPA. This was just from my personal experience, and I'll catch you on the next video.